Sony don't have the money to launch a console properly. Rise of the Robots is better than Another World. And Electronic Arts are the good guys? It's winter 1994, and apparently living in opposite world, this is Yesterzine. Tricky time, 1994. Other than the early 60s, when Ian Videogame melted his wife's Tupperware by mistake and accidentally invented the first arcade machine computer Space, there's probably not been a bigger period of change in video games. Proper no-fooling 3D was coming with the advent of the 32-bit era, and many manufacturers tried many ways to make it happen as soon as possible. Commodore stuck their 16-bit machine in an unremarkable black box with a CD drive and created a console not remotely powerful enough for the exciting new CD software, and which couldn't run half a decade of existing software either. It didn't work out. Philips, fresh from beating Sony to a collaboration with Nintendo, used it not to make the new exciting next-generation console it was supposed to be, but instead the CDI, and some of the worst uses of good IP ever recorded by civilization. It didn't work out.
This is illegal, you know.
My cakes will burn!
Atari talked up CD, but eventually couldn't be asked, and taught Nintendo a lesson they would forget to learn by choosing cartridges for their next-gen machine. They distracted from this by pointing out it jumped a generation to 64-bit. A claim that was true only if you were the kind of creative accountant who helped self-employed people earn £6,000 a year. It eventually drowned in a sea of lazy Amiga ports and whatever the actual hell they thought Club Drive was. It didn't work out. Commodore tried again by sticking their 32-bit machine in an unremarkable grey box with a CD drive, and created a machine that probably could have run the exciting new CD software if anyone had ever bothered to make any for it. Eventually, financial reality mercifully put them out of our misery. Or should have, if people hadn't spent the next 30 years pretending there was anything worth reviving from the eventual smouldering ruins of the Commodore brand. Sega tried all the plans, producing a mildly power-enhanced CD drive for their 16-bit console, running into the same problem Commodore did, with the additional downside you also needed to own a Mega Drive to use it. And then a 32-bit cartridge add-on for their 16-bit console, running into the same problem Atari had, with the additional downside you also needed to own a Mega Drive to use it. And then somehow produced some games that required both of them to really hammer home how much early 90s Sega hated money. They then, of course, absolutely nailed it with the superb 32-bit CD-based Actually a Console Saturn, which didn't require a Mega Drive at all. By that point though, it was a case of fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, I've already bought a PlayStation, anyone want a game of Tekken? There's another contender. Enter Trip Hawkins, founder of Electronic Arts. And while you're all booing at this point, with reason, it's worth pointing out that before the EA Sports rot and hiring Peter Molyneux kicked in, EA was actually credible. The early sports sims revolutionised the genre. When Mega did their early era Mega Drive Top 100, EA took first and second, beating Sonic. They brought us Road Rash, 688 Attack Sub and The Bard's Tale. In Ferrari Formula 1, Mario Andretti's Racing Challenge, Indy 500 and Car and Driver, they represented most of my sim racing childhood that wasn't written by DSi, especially the one of those DSi did write for EA. They published Origins Ultima games, Maxis Sim City, and Bullfrog's Populous and Theme Park. Please try to ignore they would eventually buy, ruin and close all three of those. Trip was long gone by that point. Trip's EA had a very good reputation. Seeing the famous animated Electronic Arts logo on your Mega Drive was generally a very good sign. Trip left EA in 1991 because he had a dream: make video gaming like movies and music, where anyone could produce the machine that played the media, and for a small license fee Trip would be very happy to collect, anyone could produce the software. It worked for VHS. It worked for CD audio. Panasonic signed up to produce the first machine, with Gold Star, now LG, and Sanyo also very interested. And he had an ace up his sleeve: his old mates at EA, whose first 4 titles all look set to obliterate what any of the above machines could do in their respective genres. It sounds like the perfect plan, but I'm guessing even if you don't know where I'm going with this, you've probably worked out it wasn't. We'll investigate just where it went wrong for the 3DO company, and we'll play all 4 of those planned EA mega games. Plus, given this magazine gives 2 of the worst games I've played in my life 5 and 4 stars, we'll see what the hell you have to do to be somehow worse than that. But first, let's see, a year ahead of the PlayStation and Saturn in the UK, if the next generation starts here. For a machine that, as we'll see, had 2 first-party publishers, early on it was EA who felt like the real one. And part of that is they had the launch window lineup no one else did, with 4 titles, all of which, one way or another, next-generation versions of very familiar games. We'll start with the one that doesn't have a direct comparison on the previous generation, and we've been here before. I used it as an example 2 months ago in fact. EA's first game is the awkwardly named Road and Track Magazine Presents the Need for Speed. Ratamphs, though, is of course the first entry into the series we still know today as Need for Speed. Don't let that fool you though. The first one, and more specifically on 3DO and PC, is a very different thing representing the chance for developer DSi to right some wrongs. They were creators of one of the early real-world driving sims Test Drive, but after the second one of those, amid legal wranglings with publisher Accolade, they were never involved again, to the series' extreme detriment. This Need for Speed is Test Drive 3. It's a sim game by the standards of the time. It's also beautiful. Our previous gen comparison here can happily be the Mega Drive version of Test Drive 2, and this is about as big a generational leap as you can imagine. Test Drive is 2D. Sensible because at this point even the solid shaded polygon 3D games had what required special dispensation to call itself a frame rate. Need for Speed is textured. It looks like a real road. It's got real cars, unlike all the above. I'll be honest, if I were 20 years older and had been an adult at this point, this would have sold me a 3DO. It's genuinely a very clear generation leap over those contemporaries, and even now it's a very decent driving game. In a just world, it should probably have had the same effect on the system that Ridge Racer did for Sony. The reasons it might not are coming up soon. But first, let's look at the other 3, which all had more direct comparisons on the 16 bits. Road Rash would be very familiar of course, but the last Mega Drive game wouldn't turn up until 1995. So here is Road Rash 2, the one most of the 16-bit potential upgraders would have played. It looks great on the Sega 16. Rolling hills, plenty of scenery, decent speed even on this starter bike. And here's the 3DO version. I think if you were a Road Rash fan seeing this in a shop, you'd be immediately convinced. It's full textured, it looks 3D, you've got recognisable locations. This town is a leap above the field with scattered objects at the roadside aesthetic of all the locations in the 8 and 16-bit versions of the game. It looks at least, no question, Road Rash is a generational leap. There's no chance anyone is going to think this would be running on a Mega Drive. Whether it would convince anyone to upgrade is a little more nebulous, because what hasn't changed is the gameplay. For want of a better phrasing, Road Rash 3DO has no enhanced sense of place. Your bike is only nominally in the world, just as it was on Road Rash 2. You don't really feel like it's on the track, there's no real physics here. And thus, while technically an entire motorbike cruise beyond anything you could have played on a Mega Drive at this point, Road Rash 3DO is at its heart a 16-bit game with a fancy makeover. Nout has such wrong with that, and I can see why more than one person in this issue will mention it as a standout, but maybe not quite the system seller NFS could have been. EA did of course go more 3D later with Road Rash 3D, but they also surgically removed all personality from it as well, and that and the final game Jailbreak are justifiably mostly forgotten. In any case, they were not on 3DO. The big one for the worldwide audience is FIFA. And it's probably worth noting this is not a launch title even here, having been just about released when this magazine came out. FIFA also originally appeared on Mega Drive. An excellent gaming pub quiz answer is that FIFA 95 is a Mega Drive exclusive, as no one else was ready for a sequel. Imagine EA caring that anyone was ready for a sequel. Like I say, different times. This is the first Mega Drive one, although let's be honest, I could have used any of the Sega 16 versions and 5 of you would have noticed. In modern times, when EA games rely on licenses and scene setting to get players, you barely believe this first FIFA has no real teams, stadiums, or players. In fact, it has no club teams at all, just countries with fictional lineups. In the English team, it's basically the dev team. Thankfully, back then, FIFA could mostly rely on playability. Sensible Soccer, or if you're the steward of what is theoretically a video games database, Championship Soccer 94, released almost simultaneously to this on console, and obviously owned arcade football from that point to basically infinity. FIFA though was slower, more measured, probably more like the mechanics of actual football, and while the players weren't real, the screen furniture already felt it. The 3DO version is different immediately, and it really wants you to know it. The first of 2 intro videos would now be released as a trailer. It is, as you might have detected from its subtle screaming about it, fully 3D, and it's going to dive the camera in, out and around real stadia to prove it. You'd laugh now, but walk into this as the kid who has spent the last 6 months playing Mega Drive FIFA, and you would want a 3DO like you wanted nothing else before. It also takes the chance to show off the 3DO's video abilities were well beyond any of its immediate contemporaries too, with a second intro using real footage which, again, is considerably beyond the 16-bit version. That's the attraction job done at least, but if they had a demo kiosk for you to play FIFA, 3DO sticks the landing. It took me about 5 seconds playing this for FIFA muscle memory to kick in. If you play modern ones using their simpler control methods, this is already halfway there from the 16 bits. It feels like a modern game immediately. It's toned down the dynamism of the intro, thankfully, because you couldn't play it if it hadn't. Still though, it's more mobile than the default camera view of a modern FIFA, but that doesn't affect it at all, and I could always see what I wanted, especially as it was decently laid out. Players too run and bounce around in perfectly convincing fashion. It's not perfect, you quickly find it spamming a specific animation where players jump out of tackles, and placing a pass could be easier. It's also missing the commentary you associate with CD-based FIFA games to this day. And like its 16-bit non-identical twin, this is a country teams only affair. Still though, it's a shame this wasn't a launch game, because if it had been, and they got the machines in the right place, I think this could genuinely have given the 3DO a foothold, even at what you're going to find out later is a hell of a launch price. Even by the tail end of 1994, I'm surprised it didn't have more impact. Goldstar thought it should. Their new 3DO machine would include it as a pack-in. I guess people may have started writing off the 3DO at this point, and it's worth noting a year hence, FIFA 96 would bring all this to Saturn, 32X, PlayStation and DOS, with the added bonus of a full club teams and players license. By then, the 3DO was dead enough it didn't see a version. In America, Soccer Ball isn't going to work. Although the 94 World Cup was currently kick-starting fandom in that country, leading to now when they call a team into Miami and expect the rest of us to take the MLS seriously. There they play a different game, which they call football, and the rest of the world calls stop-motion rugby. EA aren't stupid of course, and also made a game for those people, branded by the NFL's Martin Brundle, John Madden. You're watching Madden 92 because it's the only one I have. Although, let's be honest, I could have used any of the Genesis versions and 5 of you would have noticed. Like FIFA, no licenses here. Everything is done just by city name with fictional players. Megatech overexcitedly claimed you'd love it even if you didn't know the sport. When I said Mega put EA games 1 and 2 in their top 100, this was the one, ahead of Sonic the Hedgehog. If you know your SMR, it is probably obvious I have about as much idea on how to play pro football as the Jacksonville Jaguars. But unlike them, I don't need to, because of course that isn't the point of this section. The question is, if you like your 10-minute long sports that take 3 hours to play, would Madden on the 3DO be convincing? Madden 3DO doesn't go nearly so extra as FIFA, with a short video intro to EA Sports leading to a short conventional intro not massively different to that you could have seen on a much lesser machine. It does have the big advantage though of having the great man himself pop in to say hello.
Hi everyone, welcome to John Madden Football.
This extends to the match itself. Hand egg involves the referee a lot more, and EA have taken advantage of that to record what is basically the real-life embodiment of Walter the Softie from the Beano saying referee-like things. Beyond that though, a disappointing amount has changed. There's a little bit of swooshy movement when there's a big kick, but basically this runs like, and feels to play like, the Genesis version. Perhaps a little more effort in presentation or gameplay might have paid off for EA, and especially the host machine here. Because if you see this one on demo in GameSpot, you'll think it's better, sure, but unlike FIFA, ain't no normal person going to be convinced to spend the money on the upgrade. A slightly mixed bag for EA system sellers there then. FIFA is an outright winner, something you won't hear too often in this day and age. Need for Speed is a genuine step forward on anything you'll have played before. Ditto. Road Rash though, while pretty, is clearly the same game, and Madden probably the most crucial for 3DO's home American market barely even tries. It's not quite what the company was probably hoping for when they closed that deal. The first thing to realise here is, while this is issue 1 of 3DO magazine, that's misleading in two ways. Firstly, the machine has been out for about a year in the US and a few months here. Also, this is not an official magazine, although in the absence of one they appeared to have a relationship with the 3DO company that could fool you. This means we're already well into the life of the system. Commodore are already out of business, torpedoing the chances of the CD32, which just about sold 100,000 units. Atari, or at least this incarnation of it, are still with us, having bet the farm on the Jaguar, which had launched near simultaneously with the 3DO in both the US and UK. Atari's annual report says they sold 100,000 by the end of 1994, and just 25,000 more by the end of 1995. Which was a slight problem, since they'd made 100,000 more than that. For a random example, there would ultimately be north of 100 million PlayStations, once it swept all before it, barely a year later. The concept of the 3DO is a brave one. Mainstream console-based gaming had always to this point worked only one way. People sold a machine, which played their games, and their games only. You had a format, and broadly, you had total control. There were aberrations like Codemasters pops at Nintendo in the NES era and Ballistics on Sega in the Mega Drive times, but both risked, and indeed received, legal issues over it, and both ultimately fell into line. And yet, this is how physical films and music work. You can get your music or video player from Sony, from Philips, or indeed play those video and audio CDs on your Commodore CD32 while you wait for them to release a game you hadn't already played on your A500. So why did it not work? We're a year into the US launch here as we open the news page, and we only now have our second manufacturer, and indeed our first clue. The sexily named Goldstar GPA101M joins the marketing-friendly Panasonic FZ1. They both now cost $399, compared to $249 for a Jaguar, which was about to drop to $150. But it's much worse than that. 3DO magazine notes this is over 50% less than it launched at. It's not actually that bad. 3DO magazine can't do maths. But the 3DO did launch at $699 US, and I'm not sure inflation calculations are helpful, but it's a lot. Even a 43% fall leaves it as easily the most expensive consumer system, with only the Saturn being comparable when it launched later in '95. This contrasts with the business model of the other machines. Commodore's hinged on selling the hardware at a profit as there was no control over software. This of course had the advantage the software could be cheap, and while a lot of the CD32's library were Amiga knockoffs, Team 17 could easily sell the likes of Super Frog for £10 to £15, about 1/3 the price of most console games. It's probably though why the CD32 was technically unambitious, being almost entirely the existing A1200 minus some bits. It was the only way to keep the price down to its initial £299. Atari and others, in theory, could take a hit on the hardware as they licensed the software for a fee, or in some cases, also manufactured it. So while Atari carts were £40 plus, Atari were getting a tenner or so of that in addition to any money they could scratch out on the hardware. They were gambling, as many others would, that they could get units into homes at considerably less than Commodore and make it back later. It didn't work for them, of course, but it would serve the likes of Sega, Nintendo and Sony very well as a model over the decades. 3DO weren't selling the hardware, so 3DO game prices were the same as everyone else at about £40. But the hardware cost now also needs to cover the production costs of Panasonic and Goldstar, and a license fee to the 3DO company. Plus, those companies got involved expecting a good profit on the hardware equal to that on all the other goods they made, because they're consumer goods companies not selling consumables. So now you find yourself selling the hardware for a big premium while still being the upper echelon of software pricing. Where you make that back in video and CD is competition and innovation. Amstrad could make dirt cheap, albeit often rubbish, CD and video players by using cheaper heads or worse stacks. They could also make TVs with CD players built in, hi-fi separate units, combined CD tape and VHS players even. The fancy manufacturers can make fancy units with better amps or sell them with bespoke speakers that probably also came from Amstrad but had Fancy Co. written on them in an expensive font. Competition was not happening much on 3DO. Panasonic had reduced the price twice already to get any sales at all, and even with Goldstar coming in, you've got a duopoly where neither are going to want to squeeze it any further. There's also the argument they can't. We've just covered how you make cheap audio players by downgrading specs. You can't do that with 3DO. Your CPU has to be the ARM60, and it has to run at 12.5 MHz. You're required to have the 2 MB of RAM and 1 MB of VRAM. There's no benefit to improving those either. You could possibly develop and stick a compatible ARM running at 25 MHz in there, but if games weren't coded to support it, you're just burning money. And no one wanted to risk building a TV with one of them inside, despite of course Panasonic and Goldstar being prominent makers of those. Actually, that's not entirely fair. The interview 3DO magazine have with Trip reveals they have 4 manufacturers producing 3DOs. We know of Panasonic and Goldstar of course, and Sanyo would indeed follow. The 4th though is Creative Labs of Sound Blaster fame, who had a genuinely interesting idea just a little too late. The 3D Blaster was an expansion card for PCs. Even a reasonably old one could then play 3DO games. In essence, this is brilliant, but it comes just as the PC starts rapidly catching up anyway. We've seen before that the launch of the PlayStation would be the last time the PC wasn't king of raw power, and even by then it could do versions of Wipeout and Destruction Derby that weren't giving much away. Still though, a 3DO Blaster would work on a 386 just as well as it would on a Pentium, and genuinely could bring next generation gaming to even a relatively humble PC. There are problems though. The PC needs a specific creative-made CD drive and sound card for this to work, raising the potential cost by £160 before you start. You'd also need a free full-length ISA slot, but most desktop PCs would have such a thing. The problem is price. 3DO magazine doesn't currently know it, but they hope the cost all in will beat the $400 of an actual machine. In reality, to be attractive, given the required add-ons and lack of flexibility, it would need to be considerably less. It wasn't. The 3D Blaster launched in the US at the same £400 you would pay for a machine. If the consoles were still $700, $400 could have worked. When you could buy the actual machine for that and not need to beg Dad for desktop time, it was never going to fly. Still, even with all the troubles, the format's doing marginally better than the other 2 failures of the early 5th generation. 3DO magazine claims 70,000 sales US and 250,000 worldwide. Still, it's going to need to get a lot better very quickly if this is going to have a foothold once the others come along. On the upside, they now have 100 games released, which is twice what the Jaguar would. The 100th game was FIFA, which even in its first year is already considered a European hype monster. Trip's claim that 100 is a first-year record for a system though seems unlikely to this former Spectrum owner. So where from here? Well, despite the celebrated library, Trip is keenly aware they are short of exclusives, and the ones they currently have from EA will not be so for long. He set up a developer, Studio 3DO, in order to make those exclusives, promising anything they make will only be on 3DO. In reality, of course, very few of these ever surfaced, the highest profile one being Twisted the Game Show, which, being a canny man, Tripp lists as his favourite game on the format. Even then they hadn't published it, leaving that to Electronic Arts. Ultimately, they published 9 games, not all written in-house, and the last one was an exclusive. 2 PCs. The interview is very, your campaign has the momentum of a runaway freight train, but that may have been insisted upon. The interesting bit predictably lies in the reminder that despite everything, no one saw PlayStation coming.
It's not clear yet what level of commitment that Sony will have once they realise how much money they're going to have to lose to hang in there.
They give him space to basically market the whole endeavour, with the 4 apparent reasons their technology stack is unique.
Our total commitment to price, performance, leadership.
Well, that's bollocks for a start, because they're not the machine the Saturn is, and it'll be the same price. Sony, with the PlayStation, will of course be undercutting even their new price by 100. That, granted, is the future, but it would be difficult to argue that the 3DO was over twice as performance as its 2 fallen rivals that cost under half its launch price.
Our belief that the customer should be able to upgrade to the next generation.
And here's where we encounter the first mistake I think they made. The console is so new in the UK you'd consider it launch window. It's just reaching a year in the USA. This is issue 1 of the de facto official UK magazine for the thing. Tripp here is referencing that they have already announced the plan for its replacement, the M2. Granted, at this point it was not a new machine but an expansion for the 3DO. This was a situation that would change as soon as the original console was obviously not going to have a breakthrough. Whether it was ever truly the plan is doubtful. In either case though, it would have worried the 3DO owner. I personally think this is an underrated part of the PlayStation's success. All 3 of the Jaguar, CD32 and ultimately this machine would die with an early successor announced. Sega were already on their 3rd format in 3 years in the UK. Once again, fool me twice. And with Sega's president also making ill-timed comments about the Saturn 2 years into its life, Sony may well have felt like your only chance to have a format be supported long term. The other 2 pillars of the strategy are backwards compatibility, which might have reassured the software companies if not the users, and scalability for the developers, in that the tools they were using to develop for 3DO will be valid for M2. But again, you're rather making the assumption anyone will actually want to. As a perceptive 90s video gamer, you will have noticed he's describing a PC there. As a modern video gamer, you'll note the last couple of generations of PlayStation and Xbox look an awful lot like this, with mid-generation upgrades that did not break compatibility, but improved current games and generational upgrades you might barely notice. You don't need to be a smug modern gamer to call out his claim consoles have no backwards compatibility or upgrade path, of course. Sega fans, it's your moment. The Mega Drive, literally Sega's current major offering as he gives this interview. It's trivially backwards compatible with virtually every game from the previous generation using a very cheap adapter. It has 2 full add-ons in the Mega CD and 32X. The expansion plan failed, and maybe 3DO should have considered that, but they were certainly doing all these things he said no one was doing. That successor is being developed by the same people who developed the original, and you know them. We talked to one, RJ McCall. He's better known for a couple of other machines, the Atari Lynx and the Commodore Amiga. In one of those weird coincidences, none of those machines was developed for the company that's now associated with it. The Lynx started at software house Epix as the handy game, not to be confused with the Nintendo toy by the same name, or an item on your mum's phone box advert. Atari was signed up to manufacture the thing, and when Epix went under, ended up releasing it themselves to try and make their money back. It created the slightly awkward situation that, thanks to RJ's history, all the development tools were on Amiga, leaving Atari to place large orders with Commodore to make games for their own console. Revenge for Commodore in a way, because the Amiga was originally in development for Atari until Jack Tramiel, a man who had a history with Amiga Corporation, bought Atari. Commodore paid off Amiga's contract while buying the Amiga company outright. everyone celebrated with a lovely round of suing each other. The 3DO as well. Having left Atari to it when Epyx went belly up, RJ and longtime co-conspirators, the late Dave Needle and David Morse, started their own company. He describes to 3DO Magazine sketching out the basic design for the machine on a napkin over lunch. Trip's 3DO would acquire the design and said company rather than start from scratch themselves. RJ, like many, sees FIFA as the 3DO's crown jewel. This corresponds with his belief that the future is 3D realism, and that they designed the 3DO to have the power to do Road Rash and the soon-to-be-mentioned again Off-World Interceptor. He claims that M2 will launch alongside PlayStation, but will be 64-bit and have 5 times its power, taking an obvious pop at Atari's 64-bit-ish Jaguar while he does it. The theory is, by using items from the 3DO like the power supply and CD drive, it'll be price competitive. I'm not sure about that, the price or the reuse. The CD drive would have done another generation, its performance is identical to that of the PlayStation's. But the power supply seems unlikely given the M2 itself will surely need more power even if you could somehow disable all the now unused bits of the host system. The 32X, for instance, needed its own supply. Their claim the entire system is designed from scratch for speedy memory access and such also seems a challenge, given that again, access to facilities like the CD will have to go through the old, slow architecture. There's one more man we need to talk to. Richard Marmoy of Panasonic, the earliest supporters of the format. I'll tell you now, 3DO Magazine do not ask him and he does not volunteer what he feels about having to cut the price of the machine by $300 in a year, although he does claim to be very pleased at the progress in the UK so far. It reveals another potential source of tension though. Panasonic are clearly not happy with the 3DO's first-party software support, because they've made this the first ever console to have 2 first-party publishers. Some of the fruits of that we'll see reviewed in this issue. He does address a concern we had earlier though, essentially poo-pooing the idea of building 3DO into normal CD players and such. He deflects the question with talk of modem add-ons and video on demand, as well as an optimistic plan given early 90s technology to produce what sounds like a handheld to me. He does reveal too that the M2 would be using IBM's PowerPC chips. Not a bad plan, both Nintendo and Microsoft would do so in future. He also talks up M2 in this, I remind you, issue 1 of the magazine for its predecessor, but heavily emphasises the add-on plan, reassuring customers at length they are safe buying a 3DO now to enjoy all the great games available for it. M2, I hardly need tell you, never happened. Not as an add-on, not as a standalone. 3DO somehow convinced Panasonic to pay $100 million for the technology in 1996 and gave up. The 3DO company survived as a third-party publisher for a few years. Trip didn't appear to learn a lot though, claiming in a Next Gen interview shortly after this that the problem was the whole 32-bit generation was a failure because the technology wasn't any good. Apparently, Sony's sales were nowhere high enough to hit the 16-bit ultimate user base of 50 million systems. Again, I remind you the PS1 alone sold double that. He reveals they essentially gave up in early 1995 before there was even a PlayStation, and mere weeks after he would have given the previous bullish interview. Said interview, it seems, was instead something that sounds quite a lot like bullish. This one too, as he closes by saying he's not going to publish on PlayStation.
If I thought the PlayStation was going to be a really large market, and I thought it was going to extend far enough into the future, then we would publish for it ourselves. I don't believe that.
The exact kind of foresight that made the 3DO the stellar success it was, and I'll save you looking it up. Of course they ended up releasing multiple PlayStation games before going out of business in 2003. Trip never made a measurable mark on video gaming again. RJ? He was a much smarter lad. He left and ended up joining Sony to work on the PS3 and Vita, 2 of Sony's least successful machines, sure, but PS3 still sold 30 to 40 times as many units as 3DO ever did. There's one more topic we need to discuss on this magazine, and it's their review policy. It's a 1 to 5 star scale, and to be fair to them, they're going to use all 5 available scores in this first issue. It's where they use them that I have a problem with. For a start, let's look at the 5s. Need for Speed? Absolutely no argument here. FIFA, although the reviewer is clearly a Sensi fan, again, normal. I'll let them have Madden and Road Rash 2, meaning a perfect 20 out of 20 for our EA lineup. I'm not aware of it, and I've seen the word count, so we'll assume they're not batshit in awarding Crystal Dynamics genre-straddling release The Horde a maximum score 2 until we can play it later. There's also Theme Park, not exactly new generation, but obviously bloody great, and a place where the Mega Drive and Amiga versions were heavily compromised. Neo Geo Game Showdown Samurai would have been a welcome format addition, especially as 3DO had the only complete non-censored version in the West at the time. There was also no way a conversion of one of the 900 versions of Street Fighter II wasn't getting full marks. That's a lot of 5s, but it's the remaining one that's got me doing a live rendition of a YouTube reaction video. Off-World Interceptor. We saw the later Saturn version of this right back in 2020, and we saw it because it was the lowest scorer in that issue of Sega Saturn magazine. SSM were right. It's an awful faux open world shooter I described as not FMV, but given your freedom of movement might as well be. And that was before you account for an awful Mystery Science Theatre style gimmick where the FMV story sections were live trolled by the world's 2 least funny people who attempted to make up for what they lacked in humour with 90s sexism. At the time, I'd never played a worse Saturn game and I hoped never to. Nearly 5 years later, this is still true. 3DO magazine call it a racing game, which somehow isn't the least accurate thing they say in a review I'm pretty certain is copy-pasted from the press release, and somehow doesn't mention the FMV at all. Given in this case the only winning move is not to play, I don't blame them except on behalf of people who actually spent £40 on this. Full marks? Full skid marks more like. There's a smattering of 4s. Total Eclipse, for instance, is described as leaving no doubt of the 3DO's system power and what the machine was made for, as opposed, one presumes, to any of the games that scored higher. You're watching it, you tell me, but it just looks like Off-World Interceptor Flying About Edition to me. That's not even close to the biggest crime though, because also in the 4s is Rise of the Robots. And if you know Rise, this is about as bad a version of it as there can be. Despite being on a next generation machine, you can't jump over your opponent, despite this being possible in the 8-bit version. There's no music in the stages, like there is in the 8-bit version. It plays significantly and noticeably worse than the SNES and Mega Drive versions, and those are considered standout levels of terrible. There are 3 different grades of games worse than this, apparently. What in the absolute hell can be worse than a standout bad version of an already abysmal game on a system that should be a generation beyond it? Well, apparently it's all-time classic Another World, since that gets 3 stars. I'll allow some wiggle room on this, because other than updated visuals, this is a 3-year-old Amiga game after all. Of course, you know what else is an Amiga game that's been ported and not noticeably updated for the 3DO? Rise of the Sodding Robots. In general, lower marks are a result of 3DO magazine having a bizarre problem with games that use FMV in any quantity, despite them not mentioning it at all when FMV-led game Off-World Interceptor got full marks. On the same page as Another World, adventure game The Lost Files of Sherlock Holmes gets 2 stars, and the best part of it is apparently you can turn off the FMV, which would result in a 16-bit style adventure that made absolutely no sense at all. Dragon's Lair, a game thinner than a postcard of 90s era Kate Moss, arguably only deserves 2. But it should be noted, this was one of the first proper complete home accurate versions of it. 2 again for Sewer Shark, and somehow a single star for Night Trap. Now, I'm not going to claim Night Trap is some triumph of gaming, but it's an interesting and unique idea, implemented well, and you'll certainly want to play it for longer than Rise of the Robots. It's also, again, something that could never be done in the cartridge and floppy generation. Something they just got complaining Another World was. Still, enough of that. Just across the page is a review of Panasonic's first attempt at developing a game in-house for the machine that they would later have full ownership of. Surely real pinball will be good enough to oh dear. And that maybe is a fitting metaphor for the whole endeavour, on which for us to pack up and go play something else. Maybe I'll stick with my Mega Drive a little longer. On the back page, want to go outside and actually meet people? Astonishingly, some people do. And for those people, there is the wonderful retro.directory, a map-based guide to events, arcades, museums and even cafes. If it's on, it's in here somewhere. And better than that, if Rob's delivered on a promise he made well over a month ago as you see this, there should now be the very shiny Retro Directory 2.0 version up, with better filtering, integrated search, a memory lane feature for the vegan bars we loved and lost, a calendar of events, better mobile support, alerts, an integrated ticket system and even dark mode. So go check out whichever version of retro.directory is up in your timeline at the URL retro.directory. And also go subscribe to Rob Smith Dev on YouTube just so you can find out what the bloody hell this is. And come back here in 4 weeks to see what I've done with an entry on my notes that just says 6th gen, maybe? Subscribe, bell and send them a pleading letter and YouTube might even tell you when it happens. Good night everybody.